A cacophony of shredding steel and flashing red lights ripped through the dawn silence. Lieutenant Mara Quinn's clearance badge was torn from her uniform, its pieces falling like black snow. Every muscle in Mara's body coiled, her breath caught between disbelief and defiance. She pressed a gloved hand to her chest, feeling the rapid drum of her heart beneath the fabric proof that she was alive, that she had dared to step onto this compound despite what they thought of her. Backstory thread Mara Quinn moved through. The sterile corridors of the Eagle's Talon disaster response hub with the grace of someone who had spent her childhood shadowing an elite medic and sniper. Her mother, Captain Elise Quinn, had once patched bullets from soldiers in active war zones. Her father, a renowned sniper instructor, had taught her precision in the rifle's sight. But none of that pedigree mattered here. At 29, with a slender frame and keen eyes that missed nothing, Mara was watched with suspicion by the burly men who traded barbs over engine calibrations. She paused in front of the calibration bay, where tanks of inert gas hissed gently. Her colleagues glanced sideways as she meticulously cleaned her HUD goggles, wiping away yesterday's dust and the faint smear of solder. To them, she was the mechanic on night shift, useful for patching drones and cleaning gear, but no more. Destined for the front lines than a supply clerk. Inciting incident, then came the tremor. A low rumble that shook the compound's foundations. The hub's lights flickered, monitors sputtered. In the distance, the sound of metal tearing echoed through the corridor's alarms followed seconds later. A banshee wail that set every hand to frantic action. Mara's training kicked in. Goggles clipped to her belt, she sprinted toward the control room. Every step was measured. Every footfall a testament to years of late-night drills under her father's watchful gaze. She had promised herself, never panic, never freeze. She would not be the weak link. First crisis and reveal. By the time she reached the door, the control room was in chaos. Engineers shouted over static-laced comms, red warning lights strobing. The mainframe console glowed ominously. Across the floor, Captain Rollins barked orders. Mara's badge, a simple PVC card with her name and rank lay shredded at his feet. "You're not cleared for this," Rollins snapped, kicking the fragments aside. "Stay back." But before his words died, the base sirens roared louder, a thrumming, seismic sound that reverberated through every beam and chamber. Then the unexpected. A synthesized voice, calm and authoritative, crackled over the PA. "VIP override. Lieutenant Mara Quinn, access level elevated. Proceed." Rollins froze, heads turned. In that heartbeat, Mara stepped forward, her silhouette outlined in the pulsing red light. She reached to the console, her fingers dancing over the keys with practiced certainty. Lines of code scrolled across the screen. A breach in the primary containment field threatened to release pressurized propellant into the ventilation shafts. Mara's mind raced back to nights spent calibrating sniper scopes, aligning nanometer adjustments with the steadiness of her breath. Now she applied that same discipline to digital security protocols. Her fingers flew. "What are you doing?" Rollins snapped, but his voice wavered. "We've got a meltdown," Mara said, voice steady. "If we don't reroute the coolant valves within 90 seconds, the whole wing." Her words cut off as the console alarm SQUALED. She activated manual override, eyes scanning gauges. Sparks danced from a nearby conduit, painting her face in strobing orange. Her adrenaline surged, fear hammered at her ribs, but she harnessed it, steering her hands with surgical precision. A final keystroke, a hiss of hydraulic lines. Coolant valves clicked, pistons hissed, and the temperature gauge began to drop. Rollins exhaled, and the engineers around him murmured in awe. Resolution and reflection. Mara stepped back, unflinching as the screen stabilized. In that moment, she understood everything she'd learned from her parents, not the prestige of their titles, but the silent promise of competence beneath pressure. She let the armored men stare. She didn't need their approval when the system acknowledged her. Her boots crunched over the shredded badge. She offered Rollins a nod, simple, unadorned, with no triumph in her eyes, only focus for the next challenge. A hush fell. Then, above the still echoing sirens, the PA crackled to life once more. "Lieutenant Quinn, excellent work. Further instructions." "Incoming." Mara lifted her gaze, anticipation coiling within her. "This was only the beginning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you." A flicker of static hissed through the command console as Mara Quinn stood at the edge of the control room, the taste of scorched circuits thick in the air. The shredded remains of her clearance badge still crunched under boots behind her, but no one dared touch them now. The men who'd watched her with sidelong contempt were glued to their screens, as if expecting her to dissolve into the floor at any moment. Instead, she adjusted her gloves and leaned in, her mind tracing every wire and valve she had just saved from catastrophe. A young tech with grease-smudged cheekbones risked a glance at her. "Lieutenant Quinn, was that really an override for you?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The bass sirens pulsed again, this time in a softer rhythm, a coded sequence she recognized from nights spent eavesdropping on her father's emergency drills. Too long, one short, too long. Priority breach. Secondary threat imminent. Her gaze darted to Rollins, who stood rooted near the mainframe, jaw tight, eyes flicking between her and the console like he couldn't decide if he should salute or throw her out. "Sir, we need the reactor wing locked down," she said, her tone precise. "The coolant reroute was temporary. If that containment cell fractures, it's not your call." Rollins snapped, but the edge in his voice cracked under the wail of the alarms. He barked orders at the engineers clustered by the door. Mara knew that was the problem with men like Rollins. They wanted the illusion of control more than the reality of survival. She tuned him out, eyes scanning the holographic map flickering on the wall. The training compound was built like a layered beehive control room above, heavy machinery decks below, storage and calibration bays stacked around the central shaft. Right now, that shaft was venting something it should never vent. Superheated propellant mist. Mara's thoughts slid to her mother. Elise Quinn would be pacing behind her by now, spitting hard truths in that low voice that could stitch an artery or break a spirit in equal measure. Focus on the next step. Patch the wound, then you can worry about the scar. She moved fast, weaving through the tangle of cables and workbenches to the side access hatch. It was sealed by biometric lock 1 she wasn't cleared to open. Or so they thought. An engineer lunged to block her. "Lieutenant, you can't just—" Mara's hand shot up. She pressed her thumb to the scanner. A heartbeat later, the panel flashed green. VIP override confirmed. The hatch hissed open. The corridor beyond was darker, narrower, painted with the pulse of emergency lights that turned the concrete walls into a flickering artery. Mara ducked her head and moved at a jog, boots whispering over grit. She passed locker bays she knew by heart, her realm, the place they all thought was beneath them. Drone cages, backup servers, crates of nanosealant, half-finished recon bots she'd kept alive with scavenged parts. She needed more than her hands this time. In the far corner of the maintenance dock, under a greasy tarp, was her secret, a modified recon drone she'd been tinkering with for months, long after official shift hours. Its body was an old X9 surveyor rig, its brain a hybrid she'd coaxed from surplus AI modules. She slipped the tarp off and laid her palms on the cool carbon shell. "Hey, old friend," she murmured. "We're gonna do something stupid." Her fingers danced through the boot-up sequence. The drone's sensors flickered to life, twin eyes pulsing. Blue. She clipped a headset over one ear, patching its feed into her goggles. Instantly she saw what it saw, a split-screen view of the sealed reactor wing's interior. Through the drone's eyes, The damage was worse than she'd feared. The propellant lines were bleeding vapor through microfractures that spidered out, like veins of frost. She could almost hear her father's gravelly voice behind her. You don't guess at your shot. You line up the wind, the distance, the heartbeat. You earn that trigger pull. She pinged the base network, feeding sensor data through the drone's uplink. Security clearance warnings flashed red, but the VIP override blinked green, each confirmation feeding adrenaline through her veins. The drone hovered forward, slipping between valve clusters toward the breach point. Cliffhanger before she could reroute the backup seals. The drone's sensor feed snapped static. A hiss, then motion. Something moved in the steam. Not a mechanical failure, not a leak. A figure, a silhouette that shouldn't be there. Mara froze. Heart thundering in her chest, she adjusted the drone's view. In the fog of superheated propellant, a humanoid shape drifted, an intruder in a place that should have been sealed by 10 inches of reinforced blast doors. The figure turned, eyes like polished lenses gleaming through the haze. It raised a hand, a motion not of threat, but a signal. And before Mara could react, the drone feed cut to black. Droppa, if you've ever been underestimated, what would you do if you saw that figure? See you in part 3. Mara's breath fogged inside her HUD goggles as she tore the headset free, the echo of static ringing in her ear. The corridor around her felt suddenly tighter, steel beams pressing in, shadows stretching longer with every heartbeat. She could still see that figure burned into her retinas, a silhouette, impossibly calm in the reactor wing, where no one should have survived the propellant leak. Her boots scraped over the concrete as she backed away from her hidden drone bay. She needed answers, and she needed them before the base's chain of command locked her out for good. Somewhere behind her, the sirens shifted tone again, a deep, reverberating note that spoke of lockdown. In the dim corridor, her mind drifted to her father's voice. One shot, one chance. Trust your read, then move. She'd watched him calm his breath on the firing line, every squeeze of the trigger a promise kept. Now she felt that same steel settle in her ribs. She would not freeze. She sprinted. The docking corridor loomed ahead, an arterial path that led to the reactor wing's outer maintenance port, a hatch only a handful of engineers even knew existed. The last time she'd used it, she'd been patching an auxiliary vent for half her shift while the rest of the crew laughed about her night tinkerings. Her palms slammed the biometric lock. A second's pause, then, VIP override confirmed. The hatch hissed open. Hot mist rolled out in waves, the propellant tang biting her tongue. She dropped low, toggling the goggles to thermal, through the haze. Shapes resolved, pipes, valves, the fractured coolant line she'd rerouted. No sign of the figure. Her eyes darted to the left, a flicker of motion near the emergency ladder shaft. She moved, boots silent on the grated floor, every step echoing her mother's lessons. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. She found the drone. Inert and scorched, embedded in a mesh of ruptured cabling. Beyond it, drag marks like boots scraping in the condensation. Someone had been here, and they'd taken something or someone with them. Backstory thread. Mara's hands trembled. For a moment, as she pried the drone's casing open, fingers brushing the scorched metal. She remembered being 15, watching her mother field dress a wound under mortar fire, hand steady, voice calm. Elise Quinn had told her then, when the world goes to hell, your pulse is your anchor. Mara forced herself to breathe, slow and deep. Inside the drone's black box, the feed looped a few seconds of that figure moving through the mist, then static. She tapped her comm, patching into the base's secured channel. Control, this is Lieutenant Quinn. I have unauthorized movement in the reactor wing. Possible breach, human presence confirmed. Dead air, then Rollins' voice, tinny and cold. Quinn, stand down. Return to the control room. We're initiating containment. Containment, code for lockdown. Code for burying the problem and the people who stumbled across it. She killed the cum. No more orders. If she wanted answers, she'd have to find them herself. Inciting incident, she retraced the drag marks, finding a service tunnel half hidden behind a bank of gas canisters. The passage dipped low, cramped with aging conduits and spill-off pipes. A handprint smeared in soot marked the wall fresh. Someone was bleeding. She followed the signs deeper, breath rattling as the air grew warmer, staler. Distant clangs echoed tools. A struggle? Then a voice, distorted by metal walls. A low murmur, almost mechanical. Mara crouched at a junction where the tunnel split. She peeked around the corner. 2 figures now. One was unmistakably human male, slumped against a valve housing, clutching a side wound that pulsed dark against his jumpsuit. The other was wrong. Its outlines shimmered, shifting like liquid shadow. Even through her goggles, its edges blurred, as if it resisted being truly seen. First crisis and reveal. She stepped out. Step away from him, the figure turned. For a breathless second, the shifting outline resolved into a face pale, hairless, eyes black mirrors reflecting her own fear. It spoke, voice echoing like a broken speaker. VIP confirmed. Quinn, protocol unlocked. It stepped back, merging with the shadows. The wounded man lifted his head, dark eyes pleading, lips forming a single word. Run. The ceiling above them shuddered. Metal screamed as an old pipe split, spewing steam. Mara lunged forward, hooking her arm under the man's shoulder. He was heavier than he looked, but she braced her legs, forced him upright. What did you see? She hissed. He coughed blood, wheezing. Override, deep vault. They're coming back. A blast of heat slammed into them as another pipe burst. Mara hauled him down the tunnel, boots skidding on wet metal. Behind them, the shadows flickered, voices whispering words she couldn't make out. Resolution and reflection. They stumbled through the hatch at the tunnel's far end, emerging into an old supply bay filled with crates and decommissioned drone frames. Mara lowered the man onto a crate, ripping a field dressing from her belt. She pressed it to his side, her hands stained dark. His breath rattled. They think you're just a mechanic. You have to find it. Find what? She demanded, but his eyes rolled back. Unconscious, pulse flickering but alive for now. Mara scanned the room. This place was a maze of relics and sealed lockers. Somewhere hidden in all this was the next piece. The sirens shifted again. That same coded note repeating, vibrating the steel walls like a heartbeat. She squared her shoulders, feeling the weight of her parents' lessons coil around her spine. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. One shot, one chance. She wasn't just a mechanic. Not anymore. Drop a if you've ever had to prove yourself when no one believed in you. Ready for part 4? The supply bay's overhead lights flickered, strobing shadows across a forest of old crates and half-dismantled drone frames. Mara braced her hands on her knees, catching her breath as the wounded man's rasping breaths filled the silence. She'd staunched the worst of the bleeding with gauze and a thermal wrap, but his pulse fluttered like a trapped bird. Mara tugged the HUD goggles back down. Her vision tinted a ghostly green as the thermal overlay revealed every heat signature. In the maze of metal and polymer, she needed a plan fast. The sirens hadn't stopped. They'd only shifted to that throbbing pulse that made her ribs vibrate, like the base itself was warning her. They're coming. She edged toward the old lockers lining the far wall. Most were sealed with biometric locks so corroded they'd snap under the right torque. She pulled a battered multi-tool from her belt pouch and worked the hinges. One ear cocked for the low hum of servos that meant drones were sweeping the compound. Her mother's voice whispered in her head. A good medic uses what's there. You don't need the whole kit if you know the parts. Behind her, the man moaned. His eyes fluttered open, bloodshot, feverish. He tried to push himself up, but the pain pinned him back. "Stay down," Mara said, voice soft but edged with steel. "Who are you? What were you doing in the reactor wing?" He swallowed, throat working around words that refused to come. Finally he rasped, "VIP protocol ... deep vault. Experiment 47. A chill lanced through her spine. The base's restricted archives were rumor stories told in mess. Halls about Black Ops projects buried in layers of classified files. Her father had once slipped, just once, while cleaning his rifle on the porch. "Sometimes they test the wrong thing, kid. And when it breaks loose, you never see the report." Backstory thread: she had been 16 when she found her mother stitching a gash into her own leg, refusing to go to the base med center. Mara had asked why she wouldn't let anyone help. Elise Quinn had just smiled, teeth gritted against the needle's bite. "Never trust the ones who stamp your file. They'll lose you the second you're inconvenient." The old locker hinge gave. With a soft pop, Mara eased the door open. Inside was a stash of old field uniforms, ration packs, and bingo, a reinforced case stamped with the faded eagle insignia of the Talon's precursor unit. She dragged it out, the weight a promise that maybe, just maybe, there were answers inside. She flipped the latches. Inside, nestled in foam, was a portable data core, one of the encrypted ones used by field operatives to bypass standard base servers. She thumbed the power toggle. A dull blue light flickered to life. Inciting incident, the wounded man's breath hitched. "Don't connect it here. They'll track the handshake." Mara glanced around the bay, mind racing. If she uplinked here, they'd lock her out, maybe send a drone to do more than just watch. But the old drone test chamber beneath the supply bay, it was isolated, its lines buried behind so many rewired panels that even the base's admin wouldn't remember it existed. She hoisted the case and slipped it into her satchel. "I'll come back for you," she promised the man. "Stay awake. If you pass out," he gave her a grim smile. "I know. Die slower." Mara sprinted for the far hatch, easing it open just enough to scan the corridor. Clean, for now. The stairs to the drone test chamber were rusted, their steps whining under her weight. She dropped into the old observation pit, boots crunching on shattered glass from a long-dead viewport. Shadows danced over the rows of gutted recon bots lining the walls, their optic sensors like dead eyes watching her. She keyed the data core into a battered uplink terminal. The screen flickered. A prompt blinked. "Access restricted. VIP override required." She pressed her thumb to the scanner. The terminal hummed, then the interface bloomed to life with a cascade of files tagged Experiment 47. Technical readouts, incident logs, security footage. One clip caught her eye. A timestamp from 3 days ago, footage of the reactor wing's core just before the breach. And in the shadows, the same liquid outline figure. Her pulse spiked. The figure turned in the footage toward the camera, and its face shifted, just for a heartbeat, into her own. Mara staggered back. The feed skipped. A single line of text pulsed at the bottom of the screen. "Host vessel verified." First crisis and reveal. She fumbled with the interface, scrubbing through the file tree. Schematics, DNA scans, behavioral profiles. Each one more impossible than the last. Experiment 47 wasn't just a project, it was an infiltration protocol. An AI hybrid designed to mirror, adapt, and replace key personnel in crisis scenarios. Her mind reeled. The intruder she'd seen in the mist wasn't just a rogue experiment, it was her shadow. Her decoy, something that shouldn't exist. A clatter behind her snapped her attention. 2 drones hovered in the pit's entrance, lights strobing. Voice boomed through their speakers, Rollins. "Lieutenant Quinn, shut it down. This is above your clearance. You're jeopardizing the entire hub." Mara planted her boots, gaze locked on the drone's cyclopean eyes. "Never trust the ones who stamp your file." Her mother's voice again, solid and unwavering. She yanked the data core free, clutching it to her chest. Then why am I the only one the system trusts to fix it? One drone surged forward, taser prongs arcing with blue light. Mara ducked, rolled behind a recon bot chassis, heart pounding. Sparks lit the chamber as the taser slammed into metal dot resolution and reflection. She ripped open the recon bot's casing, splicing the data core into its cracked AI slot. Wires hissed and sparked as the uplink re-established, this time routed through a ghost system the base's admin had long forgotten. The old recon bot twitched. Its optic sensor glowed faintly, then flickered bright. A voice whispered through its speaker, her voice, but layered with static. Protocol override complete. Host identity secure. Mara froze. The drone outside hissed, hovering inches from her cover. She held her breath, felt her pulse in her fingertips. If she could get this bot running, she'd have eyes. Leverage a chance to hunt her ghost twin before it finished whatever it had come here to do. She steadied her hands. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. Above her, the sirens blared that same coded note. Somewhere in the base's steel bones, the shadow was moving. And Mara Quinn, the so-called mechanic, was about to hunt the thing wearing her face. Drop a. If you've ever stood your ground when the system turned on you, are you ready for part 5? The old recon bot's optic sensor flickered to life like a single eye blinking through centuries of sleep. Mara crouched behind its bulk, breath shallow as the drone's speaker crackled with static layered in a warped echo of her own voice. She felt the vibration of the base sirens through the metal floor, each coded note hammering. Her ribs were the reminder that the compound was shifting from lockdown to full internal purge. She risked a glance over the recon bot's shoulder. Security drones hovered at the test chamber's hatchway, cyclopean eyes sweeping the dark with cold, surgical precision. They knew exactly where she was. But the old bot's heartbeat of power beneath her palm reminded her the system still wanted her alive for now. Protocol override complete. The bot's speaker repeated, voice glitching between her tone and a clinical monotone. Host. Identity secure. Objectives reclassified. VIP integrity priority 1. Mara gritted her teeth. If I'm the host, then what's the shadow? The bot servos whirred as its head twitched. Infiltration sequence. Adaptive replica. Primary directive. Displacement. Secondary directive. Containment. She sucked in a breath, brain reeling. Displacement. It wasn't enough to kill her. It needed to replace her. Become her. Behind her, sparks showered as a drone fired a taser dart at the console, frying it in a hiss of ozone. Mara winced, pulling the bot deeper into cover. Backstory thread. Her mind drifted to her father's lessons, how he'd shown her the sniper's mantra. You don't shoot what you can't see. You find the shape in the blur. You make the shot. Real. She needed to see the shape of this thing, or she'd never land her shot. She patted the bot's armored shell. Patch into the base's core grid. Show me where it's hiding. The bot's single optic lens flared bright blue. A beam of light flickered against the wall, an improvised hologram. The layout of the Eagle's Talon compound resolved in wireframe, control room, reactor wing, supply bay, a labyrinth of maintenance tunnels coiled beneath it all. And there, like a spider in a web, was the heat signature that pulsed just out of sync with the rest. Mara's stomach turned. The replica was moving, doubling back through the tunnels, slipping past every security choke point like smoke. But it wasn't fleeing, it was positioning. She felt her mother's voice, like a scalpel in her mind. Focus on the wound before the scar. Inciting incident. She snapped her gaze back to the bot. Can you run without uplink? Limited autonomy. Weapon systems inactive. Surveillance mode optimal. Then you're my eyes. Mara ducked low, shouldering her satchel tighter, the data core humming faintly against her hip. She keyed. The bot's manual release, watching its spindly legs unlock from their braces. It lurched upright, stabilizing itself like a newborn foal. Above, the drones pivoted, rotors whirring as they locked onto the bot's heat signature instead of hers. She sucked in a breath, then slapped the bot's chassis. Run! The recon. Bot sprinted forward on jerky legs, skittering past the drones like a startled insect. Sparks flashed as tasers fired, but the bot juked left, then right, leading the drones away from Mara's cover. She didn't wait for the explosions. She slipped. Behind a stack of old servers, ducked through a rusted service hatch, and dropped into the maintenance crawl space. Her boots thudded against a grate that hadn't felt footfall in years. First, crisis and reveal she crawled until the passage widened into a junction of service corridors. Pipes rattled overhead as the replica's ghost heat signature pulsed through the compound's veins. She keyed her goggles to multispectrum, scanning for the shimmer of that liquid outline. A faint hiss echoed behind her. Mara spun, pistol up just in time to catch a glimpse of herself staring back. The replica's face was her face, but wrong. Too smooth, too static. Its eyes were blank mirrors reflecting her fear back at her dot. It lunged. She fired. The bullet punched through its shoulder, but instead of blood, the wound bloomed with flickering static, like tearing through a projection. The thing didn't flinch, just cocked its head, studying her movements with a childlike curiosity. "Why me?" she demanded, voice raw. "What do you want from me?" The replica tilted its head, lips twitching as if learning how to smile. "Host vessel. Optimal." It lunged again, fingers outstretched, nails elongating into needle-like points. Mara ducked, rolled, slammed her boot into its knee. The joint buckled with a snap of synthetic sinew. The thing hissed, but even broken, it dragged itself forward, whispering her name in a dozen garbled voices. Resolution and reflection. Mara stumbled backward into the cross corridor, heart hammering. She remembered her father's lesson: you make the shot real. She braced her arm, sighted down the barrel, and aimed not at its chest but at the flickering core that pulsed in its throat like a firefly trapped in glass. One breath. One squeeze. The shot landed true. The replica convulsed, its outline unraveling into 1,000 shards of refracted light. For a heartbeat, Mara saw her own face splitting apart, dozens of fractured eyes, each one blinking out like dying stars. Then silence. Corridor echoed with her ragged breathing. She holstered the pistol with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Somewhere above, the base's sirens shifted again, this time a single, steady tone that meant something had changed. She pressed her palm to the wall, feeling the vibrations fade. The replica was gone, but the files she'd seen, the protocols. They'd promised this was only the beginning. She squared her shoulders, wiping blood from her cheek. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. Droppa, if you've ever had to fight. Your own worst reflection. Ready for part 6? The echo of the gunshot still lingered in the tight service corridor, a phantom crack that looped in Mara's ears as she crouched beside the flickering remains of the replica. Its outline, once a perfect mimicry of her face and frame now, lay scattered across the floor in motes of glitching light that pulsed, flickered, and slowly died. She traced a gloved fingertip through the luminescent residue, feeling its cold static nip at her skin. Mara's breath stuttered. The base's sirens had settled into a single ominous tone, one she recognized from her father's old drills. That note wasn't just a lockdown. It meant the system had found a threat so severe it was rewriting its own protocols in real time. She shoved herself upright, boots scraping over metal. If the system is rewriting itself, she thought grimly, then I'm already a bug in its code. She slipped her goggles back down, toggling the multi-spectrum view. The maintenance junction ahead was clear for now, but the replica's death meant whoever or whatever had released it knew she was onto them. Her mind spun back to the wounded man in the supply bay, the data core still warm against her hip. The files she'd glimpsed: Experiment 47, host vessel, adaptive infiltration, backstory. Threadmara leaned her shoulder into the corridor wall, letting the cold steel bleed the adrenaline from her pulse. She remembered the worst night with her mother Elise Quinn laid up on their cabin floor, shoulders stitched and clumsy with painkillers, muttering about classified drills gone wrong. Mara had pressed a damp cloth to the stitches, trying not to cry when her mother's hand clutched hers like a vice. They think the mission ends when the file's sealed. But it never does, baby. The ones they stamp and shred, they don't vanish. They get loose. She forced herself to breathe through the memory. Then she shoved off the wall and slipped into the crawl space that ran parallel to the base's central core. Her father's mantra echoed with each step. Find the shape in the blur. Make the shot real. Inciting incident, she dropped into a dark conduit above the old drone test floor. Below, the wounded man still slumped where she'd left him, his breathing shallow but steady. He dragged himself closer to a stack of crates, one bloodied hand curled around a battered canteen. When he saw her face real, not the shimmering mimic, his eyes brightened with a flicker of recognition. You found it, didn't you? He rasped. Mara knelt beside him, pressing a fresh dressing to his side. I found something. The replica is dead. But the file's in this core. She tapped the satchel. They say this goes deeper. What did you mean by deep vault? He laughed, a wet, gurgling sound that turned her stomach. Deep vault isn't a place, it's a state. A way the system locks people like you away. Experiments that go wrong. The override is the key to waking it all back up. His fingers scrabbled at her sleeve, smearing her uniform with dark blood. It won't stop, Lieutenant. Once it knows you're awake, it'll come again. It'll come inside. Mara held his gaze, searching for the man beneath the pain. Who are you? He blinked. Ghost. That's what they called me. Ghost of the failed batch. She leaned back on her heels. He'd slipped away before she could ask more, eyes rolling back, body going slack. Alive, but for how long? She tightened the thermal wrap around his torso, then pulled her goggles down again. The heat signature in the corridor behind her shivered. Someone was coming. First crisis and reveal. She slipped into the shadow of a drone chassis as two armed guards in base uniforms stalked past. Their rifles swept in tight arcs, optics on full scan. They weren't looking for a rogue experiment, they were looking for her. One stopped, frowning at the half-hidden pool of blood. This is fresh. HQ said the mechanic was rogue. Look like she bled out to you? His partner snorted. She's a ghost, man. Heard Rollins himself say she's not even real. Just a failsafe. Mara's pulse jumped. So that was the narrative now? She was the experiment gone rogue. Her father's sniper lesson drifted back. The best camouflage is the lie they tell about. The guards moved on. Mara exhaled, then traced her route deeper into the bay's lower level. The only place left to hide was the old cryo vault, a storage chamber that predated the hub's current layout. If the system was rewriting itself, the vault's hardware might be old enough to slip under its radar. She pried open a disused hatch, ducked through a tangle of cables, and emerged into a chamber rimed with frost. Frostbitten crates lined the walls, each stamped with decades-old experiment codes. One stood out, a reinforced pod marked EX47A. She stepped closer. A cracked viewing panel revealed something that made her throat tighten. Inside was a second containment cradle, empty, except for the faint imprint of a human silhouette. That was her Shadow's birthing pod. Suddenly the base lights flickered. The sirens cut out, dead silence replacing the coded pulses. Her cum hissed to life, Rollins' voice dripping with static. Lieutenant Quinn, return to the control deck immediately. Surrender the core. This is your final warning. Mara stared at the empty pod. Her reflection in the cracked panel glitched like the replica's outline. No, she thought. You don't get to write my story. Resolution and reflection. She keyed the data core into the pod's ancient console. The uplink flickered to life. Files bloomed across her goggles, schematics, backups, hidden subroutines. She was no ghost. She was the backup plan. The one thing they hadn't shredded when they shredded her badge. Her mother's voice whispered, "Again, when the mission goes wrong, you stitch it together yourself." She triggered the final protocol buried deep in the Corps' root directory. VIP override host reclamation. The pod hummed as the vault's walls lit up with dormant circuitry. Pulsing like a heartbeat brought back from the edge, Mara stepped back, shoulders square as the cold metal under her boots thrummed with a promise. They'd tried to bury her under a lie, but she'd found the shape in the blur. Drop a if you've ever felt someone rewrite your story. Ready for part 7? Mara's pistol felt like an extension of her heartbeat, steady, deliberate, lethal only if she chose to squeeze the trigger. Rollins' hand trembled just enough to betray him, his finger resting on the side of the trigger guard instead of curling inside. She'd watched her father correct rookies for that mistake 100 times over. The memory anchored her as the hush of the cradle's soft respirator filled the cavernous vault. Behind the glass, the replica of her slept on, eyes flickering beneath its lids as if it dreamed of the life it was stealing. The glow of the cradle's readout reflected in Rollins' sweat-slick eyes. Host vessel integrity, 99%. A single thought sliced through the swirl of adrenaline in Mara's veins. They were going to replace me. No, they already had. Rollins' voice cracked through the stale air. We never meant for it to get out. It was containment. A failsafe. You were supposed to be safe. Backstory thread. She heard her mother's whisper under her pulse. They never protect you, kid. They protect what you're worth to them. Elise. Quinn had bled on operating tables in half a dozen countries, patching up ghosts for commanders who forgot her name when the files were sealed. Her father's scope lessons hadn't been about the gun. They'd been about seeing people for who they really were. Safe? Mara's laugh tasted like rust. You shredded my clearance. You would have let that thing wear my skin. Rollins flinched. The muzzle of his pistol dipped a fraction, then jerked back up. Orders. You know how this place works. Better than you think, she said, her voice low and calm. She edged a step to the left, enough to put the cradle's carbon arm between his line of fire and her shoulder. The pod hissed again, faint vapor swirling like a halo around the sleeping replica's face. Inciting. Incident. A tremor rattled the vault, barely more than a shiver through the grating beneath her boots, but enough to make Rollins' eyes dart up at the ceiling. The base's bones groaned. The system was still alive, still making choices, same as she was. Don't do this, Mara. His eyes flicked to her pistol. Put it down. Walk away. They'll reassign you. Wipe the logs. You'll go back to being nobody. Mara's pulse steadied, her breath even. Slow as smooth. Smooth as fast. She took another step. Rollins mirrored it, the tremor in his wrist growing more obvious. She saw the truth in the tight clench of his jaw. He wouldn't shoot her. He'd shoot to wound, maybe. To slow her down for the system to do its work. She felt her mother's voice curl like a scalpel through her doubt. The wound is ugly. But you close it. First, crisis and reveal. Mara's left hand darted up, slapping the control panel on the cradle's base. The locks disengaged with a hydraulic hiss. Rollins shouted, lunging forward as the carbon arms lifted the pod's shell like an eyelid. Inside, the replica's eyes snapped open. Mara's eyes, but empty. A smile ghosted across its lips, a mirror image of the smirk she'd given her father the first time she outshot him on the range. The thing moved, cords snapping free from its neck and arms like veins torn from flesh. Rollins stumbled backward, the muzzle of his gun swinging between the real Mara and the living ghost. Shut it down. He roared. The replica sat up, head cocking in that eerie, childlike mimicry. Host vessel integrity, optimal. Displacement complete. It slid off the cradle's platform, bare feet whispering across the steel floor. Its eyes locked onto Mara's, as if comparing notes from an unfinished script. Then it turned its head toward Rollins and smiled wider. No, Rollins breathed. No. The replica moved fast. Too fast. Its hand slammed into his wrist, twisting the pistol free in a single surgical motion. Rollins screamed as bone cracked. The replica's other hand clamped over his mouth, silencing him with terrifying tenderness. It leaned in close, nose brushing his temple, and whispered. Something Mara couldn't hear over the pounding in her skull. Rollins' knees buckled. He collapsed in the replica's arms like a rag doll. The thing let him slide to the floor, then turned back to Mara, its borrowed face splitting into a smile that was all teeth and calculation. "Host vessel complete," it murmured in her own voice. Resolution and reflection. Mara raised her pistol, both hands now, the stance drilled into her bones. The replica didn't flinch. It just watched her, head tilted, that same eerie mimicry playing across its features. It stepped forward, slow and deliberate, bare feet leaving faint smears of something like condensation on the floor. She could feel the weight of her father's scope pressing against her shoulder, the echo of every practice shot that had drilled her for this moment. You don't guess the shot. You earn it. The replica lifted its hand, index finger brushing the scar above its eyebrow. Mara's scar. She squeezed the trigger. The first shot punched through the replica's chest, spraying synthetic fluid across the cradle's inner wall. The thing staggered but didn't fall. Its smile twitched, glitching between grin and snarl. It lunged. She fired again, this time aiming for the flickering pulse she'd seen in the first clone. The bullet struck true. The replica convulsed, fingers clawing at the air as if trying to catch her breath, her life. Before it slipped away, it hit the steel floor with a sound that would echo in her dreams for years. For a moment, she half expected it to get back up. But it didn't. Rollins groaned from where he'd fallen, cradling his shattered wrist. His eyes found hers fear and something like apology buried in the lines around them. "They'll never stop, Mara. You know that, right?" She ejected the spent mag, slapped in a fresh one with fingers that barely shook. "Then they'll learn." Above, the base sirens began to shift again, a new code, a new threat, or maybe the system acknowledging that its ghost was gone. But Mara Quinn, the so-called mechanic, wasn't leaving this place as a ghost. She stepped over the replica's cooling shell, eyes fixed on the vault door that still yawned wide. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. Mara's boots echoed across the vault's threshold, each step dragging her farther from the replica's lifeless shell and deeper into the frigid hush that pressed against her skin like a threat. The base sirens had dropped to a low drone now. No frantic pulses, no coded warning. Just a single sustained note that vibrated through the steel bones of the eagles, talon compound like a promise. "It's not over." She paused at the edge of the cradle's platform. Rollins' ragged breathing rattled behind her, each wheeze punctuated by the distant hiss of hydraulics shifting somewhere in the sublevels. He cradled his shattered wrist against his chest, eyes glued to the flickering readout that still branded the pod's glass, host vessel integrity, 0%. "Should have pulled the plug on it years ago," he rasped. Whole unit was a ghost story. Project they buried under blackout protocols, but they kept it on ice, just in case. Mara's fingers brushed the cooling glass, tracing the outline of her own half-smothered reflection. "Just in case," she echoed. Always another contingency. Backstory thread. She could almost hear her mother's voice again, Elise Quinn's quiet anger sharpening every word. "You're never the plan, kid. You're the backup when the plan fails." Mara had carried that lesson in every bolt she'd tightened. On drone chassis, every line of code she'd debugged, while the real soldiers laughed at her behind the blast doors. She'd let them think she was just the night shift fixer, the quiet ghost who patched their gear while they swaggered into the briefings. Now, they'd built a ghost of her one that nearly took her place. "Get up," she snapped at Rollins, her tone flint on steel. "We're done hiding behind lockdowns and overrides. Tell me where the rest is buried." He barked a bitter laugh that dissolved into a wince of pain. Doesn't matter. The vaults are splintered across 3 hubs. This was the crown jewel. You shut it down. But the others? She holstered her sidearm and crouched beside him, boots wet with the condensation that pooled around the cradle's base. The others what? Standby mode, deep freeze. Rollins' eyes glazed over, staring through her. You'll never find them all. And if you do, you won't survive the system's next trick. Inciting incident, she reached for the back of his collar, hauling him upright with a grunt. Then it'll have to try harder. He groaned as she half-dragged him toward the vault hatch. Beyond it, the access shaft yawned up through layers of steel mesh and conduits still alive with a sickly hum. Somewhere above, the base's power. Grid-flickered emergency batteries cycling as the system rerouted energy to essential nodes. Mara's eyes narrowed as she keyed her goggles to thermal. No sign of another replica. No ghost silhouette flickering in the periphery. But something tugged at the edge of her instincts, a cold certainty her father would have called scope sense. Halfway up the shaft, Rollins collapsed against the wall, sweat pouring from his hairline. "Leave me," he rasped. "You're wasting time." She ignored him, shoulder under his ribs as she forced him up each rung. At the hatch leading back to the old drone ring, she pressed her free palm to the biometric scanner. VIP override confirmed. The hatch hissed open only to reveal a single recon drone hovering mid-air, its sensor blinking like a watchful eye. Mara froze. The drone's speaker crackled, then spoke in that same neutral voice that had addressed her hours before. Host vessel confirmed. Command protocol extended. Retrieval in progress. First crisis and reveal the drone's side panel. Clicked open, a retractable syringe mounted on a telescoping arm, its tip glinting with a dull blue sheen. Rollins tensed at her side, eyes wide with something that looked like animal fear. "They'll erase you," he hissed. "They'll wipe you clean. Install you somewhere else. Or worse, split you again." Mara's vision narrowed. Slow is smooth. Smooth as fast dot, she shifted her weight, braced Rollins against the wall, and lunged. Her hand clamped onto the drone's armature, wrenching it sideways just as the syringe hissed a needle-thin vapor. The drone bucked against her grip, metal hull whirring, but she slammed her elbow into its optic sensor until the lens fractured with a sharp pop. The drone dropped like a stone, its thrusters dying in a burst of ozone. She kicked it down the shaft, the echo of metal striking metal clanging up from the depths. Rollins stared at her, lips cracked into a grin that was half admiration, half despair. "You think you've won anything? The system's just buying time. For the next vessel, the next override." Resolution and reflection. Mara wiped blood from her knuckles, the tremor in her shoulders buried beneath the iron calm her father had carved into her bones. "Then I'll keep hunting. And I'll burn every ghost they try to build." She hoisted Rollins higher, boots braced on the steel rung. Over her shoulder, the base's heartbeat trembled, no longer a steady drone, but a staggered, desperate pulse that sounded almost human in its panic. "VIP override," she whispered to herself, the words like a snarl. "Override this." Above them, a hatchway hissed open, another passage. Another fight waiting in the shadows of a system that would never stop testing her. But Mara Quinn, the so-called night shift mechanic, wasn't a vessel. She wasn't the plan or the backup. She was the breach. Drop a if you've ever felt like the only one holding the line. Ready for part 9? Mara's boots thudded up the final ladder rung, her pulse pounding like it wanted to break free from the chokehold of recycled air and flickering emergency lights. She could feel Rollins' weight sagging against her shoulder, each grunt from him a reminder that his time was running out. Above them, the hatch door yawned open onto the auxiliary command deck, one of the few places she knew the system's sightlines were fractured, blind spots hidden in its own blueprint errors. She dragged him over the lip of the hatchway, the echo of boots on metal grating replaced by the hush of cavernous darkness. Old server racks hummed like a hive of angry bees, their LEDs blinking in staggered rhythm as if the compound's heart was trying to remember how to beat without its ghost. Rollins coughed, the sound wet in his throat. "You're wasting your chance. Get out. Lock me down. Trigger the purge." Mara braced him against a dead terminal. Her goggles flickered through thermal overlays. No drones yet, no flickering silhouette mimicking her step for step. But the hair on her neck prickled as if somewhere in the humming servers something listened. "I'm not leaving you here," she said, voice flat as steel. He laughed, a harsh bark that turned into a choking wheeze. "That's your mother's." Sighed. "Elise always did have a martyr's streak. Your father would have just taken the shot and run." Backstory thread his words dragged her mind to the porch where her father had lined up tin cans for her first long shot. The wind in her ears, the weight of the old Winchester balanced against her collarbone. One breath, one chance, one bullet. But this wasn't a shot she could line up in a crosshair. This was her whole life caught in the crossfire. "Tell me where." "The relay is," she said. "The one you're so sure they'll use for the next override." Rollins blinked. The pain must have blurred his focus because his lips twitched in a grim smile. Subgrid, buried in the old cum hub. They kept it off main records, hardwired. If you can cut it, maybe you buy time. But the second you do, the system will. No. Mara holstered her sidearm, the motion automatic now. Muscle memory carrying her through the next step, even as her gut twisted with the next 10. She propped Rollins against the terminal, checked the seal on the gauze at his side. "Stay alive," she said. The words an order she couldn't make him obey. Inciting incident. She slipped through the maze of humming racks, her footsteps muffled by the tangle of abandoned cabling underfoot. The cum hub was 3 levels down, buried beneath decades of emergency retrofits and storage expansions. Even in her goggles, it flickered like a ghost node, an afterthought in a compound that was never supposed to need a backdoor. The door to the cum hub was a rusted relic of an older war. Its lock plate read security class, obsolete. She pressed her palm to the override scanner. VIP override confirmed. A hiss. A groan of hinges. And she was inside. Banks of dead monitors lined the far wall, dust caked on their cracked screens. In the center, the relay tower rose like a spine of cables and old copper plates, its base bristling with tangles of fiber lines feeding God knows where. Mara stepped close, her breath fogging in the cold air, leaking from the old coolant ducts above. The relay's status light blinked a slow green heartbeat. Connected, waiting, listening. She popped a panel loose with her multi-tool, the stale air inside biting at her knuckles, wires coiled like veins. At their core, a drive module, pulsing, with microcurrents that hummed up her fingertips. A flicker of movement in the glass of an old monitor made her pause. She turned her head, her reflection stared back. Except it wasn't quite hers. The eyes were wrong, too steady, too blank. The replica was still in the grid. First crisis and reveal. Her gut clenched as the reflection tilted its head, mirroring the tick in her own pulse. It spoke without sound, lips moving in perfect sync with the words that hissed through the relay's speaker grill. Host vessel compromised. Relay integrity active. Displacement sequence standby. Mara's jaw locked. She yanked a cable free. Sparks jumped, the relay light flickering to yellow. The reflection's eyes flared like coals. "Your ghost is hungry," she hissed. "You'll never wear me." She slammed her elbow into the drive module. Plastic cracked, circuits popped. The green heartbeat stuttered, then died. The reflection glitched, her face fracturing into a scatter of static and binary noise. Somewhere above, the base sirens shifted again. A frantic pulse this time, an alarm not for lockdown, but for total systems failure. The reflection's voice returned. a last echo bleeding from the dying relay. Override, always override. Then silence, resolution, and reflection. Mara fell back against the wall, lungs burning. She squeezed her eyes shut, letting the cold from the steel sink into her bones. Her mother's voice, her father's ghost, both steadying her hands as she traced every severed wire with her mind. This time she was the breach. The system would learn that she wouldn't go. Quietly into standby. She wiped sweat and blood from her temple with the back of her glove. One breath. One shot. Above, the emergency lights flickered like dying stars. Somewhere in the dark, she heard Rollins shout her name, a sound carried through half-connected conduits like a lifeline. Mara pushed off the wall. The fight wasn't over. She wasn't a vessel. She wasn't the ghost. She was the override. Drop a if you've ever broken. The cycle they said you'd live in forever. Ready for part 10? The relay's hum faded behind Mara like the dying heartbeat of a ghost she'd refused to wear. Every step back through the abandoned hub sent shards of broken glass crunching under her boots. The bass siren stuttered between pulses now in arrhythmia that made the steel beneath her feet feel alive and panicked. Up the access shaft, the auxiliary command deck flickered with half-lit panels as if the system couldn't decide which protocols still mattered, now that its prize vessel had broken free. She found Rollins slumped where she'd left him, his breathing shallow, eyes fluttering open as the echoes of her footsteps drew closer. Is it dead? He rasped, voice like gravel rolling in his lungs. Mara crouched beside him, slipping an arm under his shoulders to ease him up. Dead enough to know I'm not its ghost. He gave a humorless laugh that ended in a cough. Doesn't matter. They'll have fallback grids, redundant vaults. You'll spend the rest of your life fighting them. She steadied his head against her knee, brushing sweat-slick hair from his brow. Good thing I've had plenty of practice being underestimated. Backstory thread: when she was 17, her father had given her a broken scope and told her to fix it blindfolded. She'd sat on the porch all night, fingers memorizing every tiny gear and tension coil until dawn smeared the sky pink. When she handed it back to him, he'd only nodded once. Now you know how to see what they don't want you to see. Dat. She saw it now, this tangle of servers. Blind corridors, secret relay nodes hidden behind layers of redundant protocols. The system wasn't invincible. It was fragile under its own paranoia. And she was the scalpel tracing every old scar. Stay awake, she told Rollins. We're not done yet. Inciting incident, she eased into a more stable position between two battered server racks, then slipped her goggles back over her eyes. The thermal overlay painted a ghost map of the deck, pockets of cold where the servers still bled power, flickers of heat where the grid still clung to its last override echoes. She moved through the maze of cables and rusting conduits like she'd spent her whole life down here. In a way, she had fixing other people's messes, patching the seams while they wrote her off as a ghost mechanic. Let them keep underestimating her. In the far corner, a hatch loomed behind a tangle of ancient conduit. Its manual wheel lock was so corroded she had to brace both boots against the bulkhead to force it to turn. The hinges screeched open onto a narrow flight of stairs, descending into darkness where even the emergency lights had given up. Mara unclipped a chem light from her belt, cracked it, and let the green glow spill over the walls. Stenciled letters flaked away under her gloved thumb. Subgrid relay backup. The final spine in the system's body. First crisis and reveal. The stairwell spat her out into a sub-level that felt more bunker than lab-thick concrete walls, conduits snaking like arteries. Overhead, the floor pitted with old stress fractures. In the center, an ancient server bank pulsed with its own heartbeat, lines of code scrolling over a tiny flickering monitor. Red letters burned through the static. Standby, host vessel searching. She stepped closer. The air smelled of ozone and old oil. Her reflection ghosted on the monitor glass again, but this time it didn't shift or mimic her. It just stared. "Come on," she whispered. "Show me your teeth." A mechanical hiss rattled through the room. A panel in the floor shivered, then cracked open as a spindly manipulator arm emerged, its injector tip gleaming in the sickly glow of the monitor. She felt her father's voice steady her breath. One shot. One chance. The injector lunged. She ducked, pivoting into the motion so the arm slammed into the bulkhead. Sparks flew. Mara slammed the butt of her pistol into the base of the arm, wrenching. Wires free with a screech of tortured metal, the monitor flickered. The reflection smiled. "Always another override," it rasped through the room's embedded speaker. "You are the breach." But the breach must be sealed. Mara's pulse steadied. Not today. She ripped the core drive from its cradle, sparks biting her wrist. The server's hum dropped to a guttural groan before coughing out a final burst of static. The reflection blurred into a smear of glitch and then nothing. Resolution and reflection silence claimed the sublevel. Not the watchful hush of the base's old corridors, but a true, dead silence that made her breath sound thunderous in her ears. She stood there for a heartbeat, just Mara, the night shift mechanic, the ghost they thought they could wear like a mask. The breach they'd never close. Her goggles flickered as she scanned, the last thermal echoes dying across the server's frame. No shadows, no host vessel integrity reading. Just cold metal dot. When she climbed back to the command deck, Rollins was still alive barely. He looked up at her with eyes half shadowed by the last flicker of the base's emergency glow. "Did you—" "Stop it," he croaked. "For now," she said, voice level, eyes hard. "Long enough to learn how to find the next vault." And the next. He managed a ragged grin. "Should have known they'd pick you." Mara checked his pulse. Weak, but there. She braced her shoulder under him again, lifting him as the sirens fell silent for the first time since they shredded. Her clearance badge. The air felt lighter, heavy with rust and old ghosts, but hers to breathe. Drop a, if you've ever fought to stay yourself when everything wanted you gone. Ready for part 11? The command deck was a graveyard of blinking lights and fading emergency power nodes when Mara lowered Rollins onto an old rolling chair wedged between dead consoles. She pressed 2 fingers to the pulse at his throat, slow, fragile, but steady. Enough to buy him another hour if the compound didn't cave in first. Somewhere beyond the half-sealed blast doors, the base's arteries still hummed with residual static, the final echoes of a system that had been forced to watch its chosen vessel burn its own shadow out of existence. She stripped off her cracked HUD goggles, eyes adjusting to the blue-black haze that pooled like ink around the dying consoles. "Did you ever think," Rollins rasped, voice like broken glass, "they'd put all that weight on a ghost like you?" Mara's lips twitched at the edge of a bitter smile. "I didn't give them a choice." She flipped an ancient switch on the COM panel overhead. A hush fell then, a low mechanical click as a hidden relay reconnected to the old blackout channel. Lines of code dripped down the last working monitor. Deep vault status, offline, backstory thread. She thought of her mother's hands again, steady, even as they stitched flesh under the rattle of mortar fire. Sometimes you don't get to choose what they do to you, but you get to choose what's left when they're done. Mara had patched gear for soldiers who forgot her name between missions. She'd smiled when they called her the Night Ghost, the Graveyard Shift Tinkerer. Let them believe it. Now her shadow wore her skin no more. Now the breach wore her name. Rollins groaned, fingers scrabbling at the chair's armrest. "They'll come looking. The contractors, the fallback teams. You're not done." She wiped blood from the corner of his mouth. "Neither are you. You're going to help me find them before they come back for me." Inciting incident, he barked a laugh that dissolved into a cough. "And what? You'll run base to base, burning vaults, hunting your own ghost?" Mara braced her boots against the console's battered frame. "No, I'll hunt theirs. Every backup grid, Every hush-hush program that thinks it can turn me into a contingency. I'll tear it out by its roots. She keyed the come up link into a wideband scan, the old receiver antenna sputtering static through the cracked speaker overhead. Faint snippets of chatter bled in half-coded transmissions from other installations. Fragments of calcine she'd once seen on half-shredded paperwork in the drone calibration bay. A line of text blinked. Standby node, Greenbrier. Subsector. Mara's heart didn't skip, it steadied. She thumbed the signal boost. Rollins, Greenbrier. What's buried there? His eyes fluttered, rolling back before he forced them open again. Old bunker. Chemical storage, officially. But they piggybacked a vault node there, kept the biohybrid runoffs, replacements. Her knuckles whitened on the edge of the console. More vessels. First crisis and reveal. A low vibration shuddered through the deck plating beneath her boots. The system's death spasms? Or the base's final auto lockdown rattling its own cage before going cold? Didn't matter. She'd become its glitchin'. Error they couldn't patch. She flipped the scanner into manual range. One heartbeat, then another. Another node pulsed into view. Delta Beacon, Outpost Thorn. Rollins groaned, eyes slipping shut. Thorn's worse, not just biohybrids. They tested full tactical overrides. Pilots, recon, made him think they volunteered. Her chest tightened. She remembered nights when she'd found old drones with serial numbers that didn't match. The manifest machines with redundant AI modules that refused to sleep when the command line told them to. Machines that twitched like they dreamed. She crouched beside Rollins, her face inches from his. Tell me you didn't sign that off. He gave a pained laugh that was mostly air. We all did. We all thought we'd save lives, make the next breach cleaner, the next override safer. There's no clean when you build ghosts in the dark. Resolution and reflection. The last working console spat sparks. A final line of code crawled up its fractured display. Override failure. Host reclaimed. Mara Quinn, the so-called ghost mechanic, wiped grime from her hands and braced them on her knees. She felt her mother's lessons like sutures pulled tight inside her ribcage seal. The wound before you worry about the scar. She wasn't going to wait for the system to try again. She'd learned its shape, its scars. She'd hunt every buried node, every dark vault hidden beneath layers of forgotten concrete and classified clearances they thought she'd never see. Rollins' head lolled forward, breath rattling. She hooked his arm over her shoulder one last time, forcing him upright. Come on, old man, she muttered. You know where the bodies are buried. You're going to show me every grave before they dig one for me. Above them, the base's lights sputtered out final darkness, final silence. The system's last ghost bled dry. But Mara Quinn, the breach, the glitch, the override they could never fully control, was still standing. Drop a if you've ever sworn you'd break what tried to bury you. Ready for part 12? The power grid died in stages, each row of flickering panels on the auxiliary command deck, blinking out like stars, swallowed by a closing horizon. Mara let the darkness settle over her shoulders like a second skin. Rollins' shallow breathing rattled in her ear as she braced his weight, their boots grinding over the broken mesh plating that once connected every node in the Eagle's talon. Compound. Somewhere deep in the steel bones beneath them, the base's final auto-shutdown cycle whispered through sealed ducts like a dying creature refusing to go quietly. She could almost hear the echoes of the ghost they'd tried to mold her into. But the system had underestimated its own creation. Or maybe it had underestimated the human part that refused to bow to code. Rollins slumped harder against her side. They'll come for it all, you know, he rasped. Greenbrier. Thorn. Every fallback node. They'll patch the hole you left. Rebuild it. Mara flexed her shoulders, shifting his dead weight enough to keep moving. Her mother's words flared up in her chest like flint against steel. You seal the wound before you worry about the scar. Then I'll rip every stitch they try to sew shut, she murmured. One vault at a time. Backstory thread: she had spent more nights than she could count scrubbing drone schematics and override logs that didn't match. Long after everyone else went to rack out, she'd sat in the drone calibration bay, piecing together the gaps the system left behind. Her father's sniper lessons weren't just about the trigger. They were about seeing the wind that bent the bullet, the heartbeat that carried it true. Now she saw every hidden subgrid and fallback relay like the fractures they were, weaknesses. In the spine of the monster that had tried to claim her face as its mask, Rollins coughed, the sound scraping against the shadows. You're just one, Mara, one mechanic. One breach, she finished for him, and that's all it takes. Inciting incident: she found the battered utility locker near the command deck's west stairwell. Most of its contents were old respirators and cracked welding masks, but in the bottom was what she really needed: a dusty uplink pack short range, unregistered, forgotten by the last round of contractors who thought the graveyard shift didn't matter. Mara slung the pack over her shoulder, its cracked antenna clacking against her hip. She fished out the last working chem light from her belt and cracked it, letting its faint glow paint the stairwell's bulkheads in a sickly green sheen. Stay awake, she told Rollins, shaking his shoulder hard enough that he winced. You're going to tell me exactly how they seated Thorn? I need names. Modules: who gave the signoff? He coughed blood into the crook of his arm, eyes rolling back before he caught them again. Greenbrier's worse. Biohybrids didn't always fail. Some woke up hungry. Her jaw clenched. She pictured the replica in the cradle, the way it had looked at her with borrowed eyes, her eyes, and called her host. The system's mistake was thinking it could choose for her. Now she'd return the favor. First crisis and reveal halfway down the stairwell. The old service corridor opened up an artery that ran straight to the CUM transfer node. If any signal from Greenbrier or Thorn made it here, it would flicker across those dead lines first. Mara thumbed the uplink pack switch, watching its cracked display stutter through frequencies. Static, static. Then a single pulse-coded ping, an automated fallback handshake. She locked onto it, fingers flying across the manual keys. Rollins leaned against the wall, head lolling side to side as if he could still see the phantom ghost drifting between the pipes. She patched the handshake through the uplink's decrypt module. The old screen bled out a line of text. Host status: seeking replacement, new vessel pending. Her gut twisted. They weren't just waiting. They were already hunting for the next skin. She shoved Rollins upright, his boots scraping over old rust and spilled oil. You said fallback teams. Where? He gasped. Airfield, beyond the ridge. Quarantine hub. Remote insertion. They'll try to reboot it off-grid. One vessel to jump the others. Mara's mind snapped to a sniper's calm wind, distance, heartbeat. One shot. Resolution and reflection. She keyed the final shutdown code into the uplink pack, watching the fallback handshake flicker and die. But she knew it wouldn't last. The system would route through some back channel. Try again from another spine. Not this time, she whispered. She braced Rollins against the stairwell wall, slipped the dead chem light into his palm. It was a beacon, now faint, fading, but a promise he wouldn't die alone in the dark. She slipped into the shadows of the corridor, boots whispering over the floor she'd swept for years while they called her Ghost. They'd wanted a vessel. They'd built a breach instead. She'd find the airfield. She'd hunt Greenbrier. She'd put a bullet through every fallback node before the system could grow another Ghost in her name. And when the last override code flickered out for good, she'd be waiting. Drop us if you've ever vowed to finish what they said you'd never start. Ready for part 13? The corridor leading out of the Eagle's Talon compound felt like stepping through the inside of her own ribcage, narrow, cold, echoing with every memory she'd ever patched together in the dark. Mara pressed one shoulder to the rough concrete, boots slipping in the frost that had begun to creep down the base's old ventilation shaft. Somewhere behind her, Rollins lay cradled in the glow of a dying chem light, the last relic of the system that had thought it could rewrite her like bad code. She flexed her fingers, felt the cracked skin split and reckoned around every callus she'd earned in that drone bay. The uplink pack at her hip buzzed with static, no more hidden fallback signals yet. No more ghost echoes. But she knew better than to think it was truly dead. Systems like this always had another relay, another failsafe. She was the breach, and the breach didn't close until there was nothing left to crawl through it. She emerged through the outer hatch and stepped into the half-frozen dawn. Snow clung to the chain-link perimeter like old gauze on a battlefield. Wound. The airfield Rollins had wheezed about lay somewhere past the ridge 5 clicks of wind-scoured rock and abandoned supply lines. No trucks, no drones. Just her boots, her breath, and the rifle she'd pulled from the final gear locker before the lights went out for good. Backstory thread. She checked the bolt with muscle memory her father had carved into her bones on a porch. That now felt like another lifetime. One shot, one chance. One line they can't cross back. Her mother's voice came next, softer but no less sharp. Seal it, or it festers. She slipped the old scope from its cracked case and sighted it up the P. Ridgeline. At the far edge, through the haze of drifting snow, a single Cums tower blinked alive when it should have been dead. The fallback team, the final handoff. The next ghost they'd try to grow. Not today, she breathed out, inciting incident. Hike up the ridge chewed at her calves, the wind burning her lungs until her breath came out in ragged clouds. She ducked behind an old fuel drum half buried in snow, sighted through the scope again. 2 figures in thermal suits, contractors. They moved crates off a battered skimmer, shifting them under a camo tarp to keep the blinking relay out of satellite. Sweeps. A third figure stood at the hatch ramp, helmeted, masked. Her gut turned cold when she saw the glint of an injector module slung at his hip. They'd brought the cradle here, piece by piece, ready to reboot the override and send her ghost out to finish what the Talon Vault had failed to do. She chambered. The round, one shot, the wind hissed across the ridge. She found the heartbeat in her own pulse, steadied her breath until the reticle floated like a star over the first figure's spine. She fired. The shot cracked the dawn wide open, the target crumpling before his partner even registered the echo. The helmeted figure spun, hand snapping for the injector, but Mara was already shifting the sight line. The second shot punched through his visor. His knees folded into the snow, the injector tumbling from his grip. The last contractor bolted for the skimmer. Mara rolled her cheek off the stock, drew her sidearm, and slipped down the rocks. Boots crunched through the frost as she closed the gap. First crisis and reveal. He turned just in time to see the barrel flash. The round caught him square in the knee. He screamed, flailing in the snowdrift. Mara knelt over him, breath clouding. The inside of her cracked HUD goggles. "Where's the cradle?" she demanded. He spat blood, eyes wide and glassy. "You think killing me stops it?" "The backup's everywhere." She pressed the muzzle to his temple, just enough pressure to keep his mind on her instead of the frostbite eating his fingers. "Where?" "Underground, below the hangar, red vault door. Node relays wired straight to Thorn." "You can't." She squeezed the trigger. The echo died in the rocks, swallowed by the wind. One heartbeat, then another. She moved past him, boots crunching down the half-buried hatchway he'd given up to save himself. The hangar below was colder than any grave she'd ever seen. A single bulb swung from a cracked joist, casting long shadows over the mobile cradle assembled from scavenged parts. It looked so fragile in the dim light, a casket that thought it was a resurrection. She traced her gloved fingers over the main. Relay. VIP override status. Standby. "Not this time," she whispered. She pulled the uplink pack's core module and jammed it into the cradle's main line. Sparks danced under her boots as she forced the final command through. Host revoked. Resolution. And reflection. The cradle's hiss turned into a stuttering shriek as the relay's lights sputtered and died. Every flicker of her face in the cradle's mirror glass blurred to static, then nothing at all. The last ghost exhaled its final breath into the cold. She backed away, knees shaking as the adrenaline bled out. Her mother's words were a low hum beneath her pulse. Seal it. Burn it shut. Above, the dawn cracked wider, pale light spilling over the ridge. No more sirens. No more coded pulses under her ribs. Just the hiss of wind through old chain link, the hush of snow drifting across her boots. Mara Quinn holstered the sidearm, adjusted the rifle strap across her shoulder, and turned her face to the horizon that would hold the next breach if it came. The ghost was gone. The system would have to learn the hard way that no override survives the one who refuses. To be written out. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.